afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. And welcome to our e-learning webinar focused on keeping educators and students cyber safe. My name is Jill Tokuda, and on behalf of Jennifer Sabas and our Cyber Hawaii team, really just want to thank all of you for participating in what's now our third webinar with the Cyber Readiness Institute. In this new normal, we're no longer doing in-person workshops, but this has definitely allowed us to keep nimble and on the pulse of what people are looking for and some of the questions that we have in this new normal. First of all, we could not have done it without our critical community partners that have really been there to help us. We have the Better Business Bureau, the Chamber of Commerce of Hawaii, the Hawaii Association of Independent Schools, Hawaii Charter School Commission, Hawaii Island Chamber of Commerce, Hawaii Island Economic Development Board, the Girl Scouts of Hawaii, the Hui for Excellence in Education, HE'e, the Maui Economic Development Board, and of course, the Small Business Development Center. Hopefully I haven't missed any one of them, but they have been critical to the success of our webinar series. As I'm sure many of you can imagine, as educators, parents, and community, these are definitely unprecedented times, and we're really trying to figure out how do we keep our children both physically and digitally safe as we continue to teach and learn. And while there's some high hopes that we'll get all of our kids back into classrooms soon, I can speak for many parents out there. We're looking forward to that day. I do believe that some sort of blended learning will always be a part of both the curriculum and pedagogy going forward. So we're very pleased today that we have a panel of local and national experts able to answer our questions and speak to the issues. First, and you'll hear from him next, is Craig Moss, Director of Content and Tools of the Cyber Readiness Institute, great partner here with Cyber Hawaii. We have Maverick Fernandez, is the Director of the Kamehameha School's Information Security Office. Vincent Hong, the State of Hawaii Chief Information Security Officer. So he's our CISO for the state of Hawaii, big job. And of course, special guest and someone who will be able to speak to education, higher education issues, Jody Ito, Chief Information Security Officer for the University of Hawaii. So with that, I think we'd love to get started and then start taking some questions as well. So Craig, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Jill. So first, I'm going to very, very quickly give you a little background on our institute. But to set it up, this is a great cartoon that I saw in a magazine. For health and safety reasons, we'll be transitioning to cyber crime. And we have seen explosive growth in cyber crime and attempted hacks over the last 3 months. So you have to keep that in mind as people have gone to work remotely, as they've gone to school remotely. It's really opened up a lot of new avenues for cyber criminals. Our institute is focused on helping small and mid-sized businesses to really understand cybersecurity and to become more cyber ready. We share free resources and content and tools. So everything that we provide is free, and we're here to help companies and individuals improve their cyber readiness. The reason we can do all this and not charge anybody is that we have great sponsors. So we're sponsored by MasterCard, by Microsoft, ExxonMobil, General Motors, Principal Finance, and PSP Partners, which was founded by Penny Pritzker. And then at the top, the Center for Global Enterprise was founded by Sam Palmisano, the former CEO of IBM. So they have dedicated resources to allow us to help all organizations try to improve their cyber readiness. So the core of what we do, and this is really something that you can start to think about as you prepare to become more cyber ready, we focus on 4 key issues: passwords, software updates, phishing, and the use of USBs and removable media. The other thing that we encourage is you should know how to respond to an incident. So if your computer was frozen or taken over by a ransomware attack, what would you do? And just as we all know what we would do if the building was on fire, all of us, whether we're a teacher or a student or a parent, should know what to do if we suspect that our computer was infected or penetrated by hackers. Our program is really geared around the 5 steps that you see on the right, and we very much focus on behavior and the behavioral aspects of cybersecurity less so than the technical aspects. Because for small businesses or for individuals working at home or a teacher, there are behavioral things that you can do that will greatly reduce your risk without needing to spend money on technology. Of course, technology is critical, plays a critical role in it, but technology alone is not sufficient. One of the other things, and this is something that I would encourage all of you to think about, and I know in the audience today we have some teachers, educators, we have people that are running IT departments for schools, we might have some parents, but we always think about the cyber leader. And so even in a family, you could have a cyber leader in your family. Who is the point person that kind of lays the ground rules, who other people would go to for questions? Certainly in a school environment, there should be a cyber leader. And their job is not necessarily the technical job, it's more of the building awareness around how to prevent cyber attacks, and then what to do if it happens. So that's something that we talk about a lot in our program, is that role of the cyber leader. And in the work we've done with Cyber Hawaii around small business, we very, very much focus on the idea that each small business should identify a cyber leader. So the topic for today is really keeping educators and students safe. So I'm going to turn my attention to that. Some of what I talk about is going to be, you'll see, as a theme that gets carried through. As Maverick discusses it and Vincent discuss it, it'll be carried through the discussion. So given the COVID-19, everybody was scrambling to remote. Whether it's remote work, remote school, remote whatever, everything was pushed out remotely. And I ask all of you, regardless of what your role is in this, really to be thinking about what devices are being used, how are you connecting to the internet, and then what kind of access do you have? Those are really the three things that are most important to be thinking about. And there are a lot of issues that came up with remote work, and particularly for remote schooling. There could be more kids and adults in a household than there are computers. Therefore, it's not only a personal device being used, but it's a shared personal device. So for each of you, it's really something where, if you're on the teacher side, be thinking about that, what your students are using. Or if you as a teacher, are you having to share your device? So going into these four issues, the first one is passwords and passphrases. And we at the Cyber Readiness Institute, we really advocate passphrases with 16 characters. And the reason a passphrase is, if it's that long, it's easier to remember a phrase. Could be a line from a song, a passage from a book, whatever you feel that would be easy for you to remember. If it's that long, it also eliminates the need for you to need to change it unless it's actually been hacked and compromised. You should always use separate passwords for school versus personal. So whether you're a student or a teacher, you should always be having separate passwords for that school aspect of it and personal. You never want to commingle passwords in those two environments that you use computers for. If you have a shared computer, which a lot of people are using shared computers now, you should have your own password and your own login into that computer. Vincent and Maverick are going to talk a little bit more about home routers later, but one quick thing that we see a lot is the home router, which is the device you use to connect to the internet. A lot of people have never changed the password on it. And so it's a default password, and that makes it really easy for hackers to just identify passwords that have not been changed. So it is something to make sure you go in and change the password on your router. And finally, multi-factor authentication is really a very, very important safeguard. And we encourage you all to use multi-factor authentication whenever possible. And very simply, That is something where it could be a text message, where you get a text message with the code. It could be that you get a call to your cell phone. It could be that you have a token. Sometimes in fact, it used to be that it would be a token that you would press the button on the token and it would generate a number. All of those are forms of multi-factor authentication, and more software is utilizing that. And anytime you can, please use it. I know it's a little inconvenient, but in the long run, it will save you a lot of time and pain. Patches. So very simply, patches are computer software updates, and turn on auto updates. You know, that's a really simple way to kind of simplify your life. And you need to try to, if you do see an update offered, install it as soon as possible. Because hackers are looking, when patches get released, they're looking at those to identify vulnerabilities and then quickly time to take advantage of people that are slow updating their software. So that's another simple thing you can do that's going to reduce your risk. And as I go through this, and as you hear from Vincent and Maverick, think about the analogy to other types of safety issues, like fire. All of us do certain routine things to reduce the chance of having a fire, right? It's better to prevent a fire than it is to actually have to put out a fire, or God forbid, have to recover from a fire in your house. So all of these things are things you can do that might be a little inconvenient, but in the long run, they're really going to save you a lot of time and energy. Phishing. This is one that people hear about all the time. And a lot of people feel that they're pretty aware about how phishing works now. But as we become more aware of it, the hackers become more sophisticated at it. So it could be now that you're getting an email that looks like it's coming from your teacher, or it could be, if you're a teacher, an email that looks like it's coming from your school administrator, or even a student. All of these now are ways that hackers are trying to penetrate and fool you into doing some activity. And usually they're trying to fool you into either clicking on a link, going to a fraudulent website, entering some kind of information. Would typically be the kind of things for students and teachers that they would be trying to have you do. For businesses, quite often they want to have you transfer money. And I can't tell you how many small businesses and even mid-sized businesses get fooled and transfer money. Some urgent email coming from the CEO, and it says, I urgently need you to transfer money to such and such a vendor, or they're going to shut off our whatever internet access. And these things happens quite a bit. You want to mouse over the email sender's name to try to identify the origin. The other thing is, if you're in doubt at all, find a way to confirm with the sender, and not by replying to that email. So there should be, teachers and students should have an alternative way to try to communicate to verify anything that looks suspicious, or the school and the student, or the school and the teacher. USB use. Now, these things are really, really useful and very, very convenient, and also really, really dangerous. So you need to balance that. Now, a lot of people use them to transfer information from one computer to another. And best practice would be just not to use them, because a lot of times they can have malware on them originally coming out of the factory. And so even though you may not have seen it be infected, or it has not been infected by you, it could have been infected originally when it was being manufactured. So best practice is not to use them. If you do need to use them, make sure that you're running some kind of virus scan. And that might be a question that people could answer a little bit later. If our experts have any other ideas on that, on how to restrict their use. Cloud-based data storage or file transfer is really a preferred way. And I think a lot of the educational platforms allow that. cloud-based file transfer. So if you can avoid using USBs, do. And video and chat applications. I know that this is going to get covered a little bit later in more detail, but I'm just going to hit on a couple key things here. Most of them, we use Zoom a lot, and Zoom has a feature now when you can require a password for the meeting, and we suggest that you would always use the password required. For home users, quit the app when it's not in use. Turn off the video or audio functions. So like, don't leave, if you're using Zoom or WebEx or whatever you're using, we suggest you don't leave it open all the time, that you open it up when you need to use that app, and then close it and shut it down when you don't. Don't forward invitations to others. That's a bad practice, and that's something that should be avoided. And finally, if you're in a chat or a video chat and you see unfamiliar, especially phone numbers, or verify who they are, call them out. Say, hey, I see a 917 number. Who is the 917 number? And I've talked to many people that have done that and actually had then people drop off of calls. Most of these applications are working very, very hard to try to improve their security, and they're doing a pretty good job at it. But nonetheless, being careful on your part is an important step. So we kind of wrap this up with the ABCs and how to make it easy for students and good cyber hygiene. So authenticate your accounts by using strong passphrases. That's really the most important first step. Beware of phishing attempts. Help students to verify that you're the sender of the email if you're the teacher. And be conscious of that if you're teachers, is that the students, we do want them to be cautious, and you need to find a way to make them feel comfortable and kind of secure, and do give them that alternative channel to reach out if they're suspicious about a certain email. And caution students about the video app to only turn it on if they see it's you calling, not to be fooled into opening it up with an unknown caller. So those are really some of the basics that I wanted to cover. I want to leave a lot of time for for Maverick and Vincent. And also we have Jody on from University of Hawaii. Jody was a participant in one of our earlier webinars, and she's here to give a higher ed perspective to this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maverick, and he's going to go into a little bit of background about the approach that he's taking at their schools. Maverick, over to you.
Thank you, Craig. Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for taking the time to attend this session. Next slide, Craig. So prior to COVID-19, all of you are probably familiar with this as the view of a traditional classroom. Since COVID-19, things have changed. Today, this is the new look of the classroom. Students are at home learning online. Next slide. And what we've noticed is it's not just students. The entire family is either working from home, students are learning from home, families are shopping, socializing, and even now we're getting our entertainment online with Netflix and Amazon Prime. I recall last Saturday I was celebrating my brother-in-law's 56th surprise birthday party on a Zoom session as well. So we had, I think, 11 families across 6 time zones. So, so people are spending a significant amount of more time online. And the average person nowadays has 4 connected devices, and that's expected to grow to 11 in the next 10 years. So most of our lives are being spent more and more online. Next slide, please. So protecting yourself at home is even more important than ever, especially in this post-COVID-19 environment. As Craig mentioned earlier, it's important to change the password that you choose and to choose a strong password, especially for your router, as Craig mentioned earlier, that administers your internet connection to the ISPs. And not only is it important to get a strong password, also be careful on the people that you trust to connect to your network. Only allow people that you trust on the network. I recall a couple of months ago, I went to an open house, and as I walked into the person's house, they had their internet password posted right on the front entrance. So be careful on who you share things with, because once you share that out, people can access it even if they're not inside the house, because it expands outside onto, sometimes out into the lawn and even out to the sidewalk. And if you're not familiar with how to do this, contact your internet service provider. Check on their websites. A lot of them have a lot of good services that are available for you. Next slide. Here in Hawaii, the two main providers are Hawaiian Tel and Spectrum. Both have very good websites, and they have dedicated sites there that help you with your internet security. If you want, you can call them. I called them up, and a lot of them have a lot of good people there to help you walk through some of these services and help you walk through how to change and set your security settings on your internet router. The other thing that we've noticed is part of this COVID-19 and the e-learning that we've seen is a lot of people are dependent highly on video conferencing software. There's been a huge spike in things like Zoom, WebEx, Teams. So making sure that you use the security settings and security practices for video conferences is very important. Next slide, Craig. Here are a couple of key things that we communicate to a lot of folks that use video conferencing in our education environment. Craig mentioned earlier, protecting that using a password. A lot of the video conferencing systems now incorporate having a password and recommend that you set a password for each time you create a video session. The other good practice is using waiting rooms. Waiting rooms allow you to take a look and see who is there before you allow them into the sessions. Some of them allow you the ability to look at the entire waiting room session and allow everybody in at one time, so you don't have to go through the pain of including each person in individually. And then if you see any participants that you don't recognize, you can easily remove them. Also, the thing to do is to make sure that once you have your meeting started, you can lock the meeting to prevent people from entering in that you don't know. That way you can focus on your session and not have to worry about people coming in or out of your video conferencing session. And also the other thing to do is, as Craig mentioned earlier, is make sure that you're up to the latest version of the software. Zoom had spent the last couple of months updating their security practices and security software and just released a new version last week. So make sure that you get the latest version so you get all of those great security features in there. The other thing is making sure that you educate all your employees, your staff. Here at KS, what we do is we have bi-weekly, twice a week, we have short 15-minute sessions that talk about the features, not only for security, but also things that help you use the product a lot better. So it's always good to go through and have educational sessions for your workforce and for your team. Also, don't share out links, as Craig mentioned earlier. Having links that you don't trust is a key way of getting people to phish people. And then also, don't allow participants to share by default. You can always turn that on and off, so that allows you to control the session. And also, their recording sessions are always a good feature, but make sure you only use it when you really need it. So those are a lot of good practices that we recommend that you go through when using video conferences for education purposes. And with that, I'll hand it back to Craig. Sorry, Craig, you're still on mute.
Thanks very much, Maverick. I thought now, quickly, before we go to Vincent, I'd like to call in Jody Ito from University of Hawaii just to comment on some of the things that you've heard so far and the application to higher ed. Jody, are you available?
Yes, I'm online. Thank you very much. And so some of the things that Maverick was talking about concerning recording of classes, I'm sorry, you called recording of meetings. So I'm actually thinking about it in terms of a class session and recording of a class. So some of the things that we had to worry about is in classroom settings, are FERPA, is the recording being done in compliance with FERPA? So there is differences between FERPA for K-12 and differences in higher education. So ensuring that if you're recording your class, just to make sure that you're in compliance with your FERPA standards and regulations. And so the other things is definitely about sharing the links for your video conferencing. So we do advise people to make sure that your conference has a password, that you don't enable screen sharing immediately. But what some people did inadvertently was they actually posted the meeting ID plus the password in a public forum, which was available to anybody on the internet, and they forgot to disable screen sharing. So needless to say, they did encounter a unwanted visitor into their video conferencing session. So making sure that everybody who's running these meetings fully understand how to protect the conference. And that's very, very critical. We've had multiple instances of what we call unwanted drop-in visitors to our classes. So thanks for the opportunity.
Great, thanks, Jody. Thanks very much. So now we're going to go over to Vincent from the state of Hawaii.
Hello. All right, next slide, please. So my portion, I'm going to go over, there's going to be some overlap with the other presenters, but hopefully we'll have some of the visual imagery here to help highlight the importance of having really, really good, strong controls. I'll start off with this initial slide. Traditionally, cybersecurity or information security divided the concepts into a triad, three key concepts: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Most of the time when you're talking about information or cybersecurity, a lot of folks are focused on the confidentiality side. So where there's this sensitive or regulated information, we want to keep that private. But we need to also be aware of the integrity and the availability aspects as well, where integrity means, is that data trustworthy? Because if it's not, then a bad actor could go in and manipulate things and really cause some dramatic changes to your business. And on availability, that tends to win over the other two concepts, because the information needs to be safe, it needs to be accurate, but it also needs to be available. So during this period of the pandemic, availability has been a very huge impact on many organizations. In the state of Hawaii, for example, we have lots of legacy on-premises systems that function, and if our staff don't have the ability to connect to it in a safe, secure way from home, then they need to actually come into the office to access and manage that data. Many of us, however, have started modernizing with various concepts where if we choose a cloud first or a cloud smart initiative, we start moving that data into public clouds and secure it there. And that way, when you are remote, whether on-premise or remote, if there's the proper authentication and identity, you can log in and access that data. And in between is using something like a VPN, or virtual private network, where you may be off-premises remote, but you have a secure means of connecting to your on-premises infrastructure and accessing and managing that data. Right? Next slide, please. Right, here's a reminder. Ooh, I was hoping that'd be an animated GIF. That didn't quite work out that way. This is a reminder as passwords. A lot of folks think that password quality is based on how complex it is, meaning that it has to be a mix of uppercase and lowercase letters, needs to have symbols, effectively where something that you just can't memorize off the top of your head, and that only something a machine would be able to remember. The key factor is on the ability to break the password is how long that password is. Adding complexity adds value as well, but it's hard for you to remember and type in. So if you have a lot of passwords to manage, for example, I'd advise you using something like a password manager to keep track of those things. But as far as individual passwords go, whether it be your home email address or your work one, we need to make sure ensure that they are unique, that they're not shared between each other, and that they're long and they're strong. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so here's a little math on how hard it is to compromise crack a password. In many organizations, the default standard for an operating system is Microsoft Windows running Active Directory. So this is where these numbers are directly matched off of. If you look at that image on the right, this is a custom PC with a lot of different graphics cards. What these graphics cards do is that there's a graphics processor unit, and what that does is for gamers, you're familiar with it, it lets you render the game, and so you can play very, very effectively. But in addition, we can use that to leverage the math computational capabilities to brute force or to compute passwords. And if you look here, the math really spells out why having long passwords is valuable. Because based on last year's hardware, an 8-character password can simply be cracked in 3 minutes. And as you add 1 character at a time, you'll see that the time it takes to crack that password rises exponentially. So if you use a password, like Craig had mentioned, that's 16 characters long, and it's actually unique and not being reused ever, you have a very, very high likelihood that that password would not be compromised from a direct brute force attack. Like just in this table here, for 13 characters, it would take 5.2 million years to calculate all the combinations to be able to look up that password that you have. Next slide, please. All right. In these days, since a lot of information is accessible from the internet, a key criteria now is not only to move beyond passwords. And Microsoft has been leading the charge in this respect by promoting the concept of passwordless for folks that are running a modern version of Windows 10. But even accessing Azure or Office 365 email, there's the ability to enable multi-factor authentication. And from their compromise statistics themselves, it shows that virtually all attacks can be blunted or stopped when multi-factor authentication is enabled. So those are some very, very hard statistics to help validate this. Yes, in the beginning, it's very inconvenient, but once you enable these processes and use enough, it becomes a practice. Much like how like safety belts being introduced in cars. If you remember those days when, way back when safety belts, seatbelts weren't required, that was a normal, that was the norm at the time. And that once it became law, there was a big outcry about it, but effectively now, for most people at least, that it is normal. It is just expected. So expect that to happen with multi-factor authentication as well, because simply any account that you have that's accessible on the internet, if it's not protected by multi-factor authentication, then it's vulnerable, plain and simple. All right, next slide, please. All right, this is regarding phishing. That is the easiest, most popular way for passwords to be compromised. It was mentioned earlier that you go to a compromised website or an email, then you're not paying attention, you click on a link, and then it redirects you to an authentication page where you yourself are fooled into logging into a website, and you actually yourself are divulging, giving up the password that you're trying to protect. So here's a very, very simple mnemonic created by our friends at the University of Hawaii, and that is SEAR the Phish. So you receive a message. You need to stop, examine, ask yourself, hey, is this suspicious or not? And most importantly, report. With the state of Hawaii, we've been actually conducting simulated phishing exercises for 2.5 years now. We do it on a quarterly basis. The intent is not actually to shame the users into learning. We provide that as a teachable moment, and also to gather statistics. The very, very key metric of these phishing exercises is not actually how many people fail and fall for the phish, because that's an important data point, but more importantly, how many people are actually reporting it. And to make it even simpler to report, with our mail system, there's an icon in your mail tab where you just click on it and submit that as a phish. So what we want to do is we want to make things as simple and to manage as possible. In the past, before we had that automated submission mechanism, it had to be forwarded to our SOC. We perform a manual review. But now with that button, for example, there's an automated submission part to help speeds up the review for both the submitter and also the reviewer. All right, next slide, please. All right, and to close up with my segment of the slides regarding this pandemic, I had to see the perspectives both as a as a state CISO and a supervisor, and making sure that our staff are able to telework safely and appropriately, but also as a parent working at home. For this presentation, for example, I could not trust my internet access, so I drove into the office to help provide this presentation. Because right now, what the kids are doing is, 2 of them are streaming the SpaceX launch and watching that on education. The other one is on a video session with their musical instrument exercise. And afterwards, hopefully, they will go to Khan Academy and learn online, rather than doing what I think they're probably going to be doing, which is play Minecraft or Roblox. All right, and to tie it all together, is the communications piece. So both my staff and my family, we need to have good communications about who's doing what and at what time. Connectivity is very, very important, because if all of us are trying to conduct video sessions, play games, stream video, there's not enough bandwidth available to be able to manage that. And that will hit on the A part of the CIA triad. And cause an outage of some sorts. For me personally, the hardest part really is time management. Not only is to juggle all these meetings and sessions with the staff, but also check in regularly with the family and making sure everything's okay. And they're doing more than play video games. Like, hey kids, it's time for lunch. It have to be that regimented. And last piece is on the safety side. Not only is the physical safety side where we need to shelter at home, but more on the cybersecurity side is when we have many devices at home. Both from the organization and the home side is that there's the Internet of Things, where TVs, if you're not paying attention, are on the internet and they're not being updated on a regular basis. Our refrigerators, if you're not paying attention there. And then we have a mix of work systems and home systems, and having all those different systems commingled in one network is a challenge. So the consumer grade software at home, hardware, it's getting a little easier to manage. For me, for example, my wireless setup has the guest access available. So then, certain systems that shouldn't be normal on there on a regular basis have the ability to connect, and so we don't have to change our home password all the time. Any Internet of Things devices, they're usually turned off by default unless we explicitly want to turn them on. And as far as separating work from home, if I walk away, I lock my keyboard. There's absolutely no way I'm going to let my kids get access to my work machine. It's just one of those common practice. Even if I walk away for 30 seconds, I'm going to lock, exactly like at the office. I'm going to lock the keyboard so they can't accidentally do something wrong and come back to it. All right, and I think that's the end of my slides. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great, thanks, Vincent. Jody, let me go back to you and get you to comment on what Vincent covered, and then I do have a couple questions for the panel.
No, actually, I think what both Vincent and Maverick has said is spot on. Really, it's about taking what you would normally do in an office and making sure that you're applying it to what you're doing at home, but also taking into the considerations that now you're having a lot of the learning of your children done at home. and ensuring that the proper security considerations are making sure they understand that too. So I'm going to actually bump into one of the chats because one of our participants asked, do you think multi-factor authentication is reasonable for students of all ages? And so I think that even the very young ones, maybe not kindergarteners or pre-kindergarteners, will fully understand what multi-factor authentication is, but I'm thinking that they're good at following, what they need to do. So they're good at, making sure that they know how to get what they want. And if that is having to learn that they need to do a special thing, and some of the multi-factor authentication things are more about making sure there's a human there. So it might be clicking on all the pictures that have a traffic light on them, right? But once they understand what that second factor is, they'll probably be able to figure it out. But I'm gonna leave it to Maverick and Vincent to answer that also.
Maverick, what do you think about, is there an age at which you think multi-factor authentication is appropriate, or would you try to encourage people from first grade on up to try to use it?
I think it's got to be at a particular point, because also for the younger kids, there's not a lot of sensitive information that they access as well. A lot of the stuff is relatively, benign and generic. Once you get into the higher grades, then I think it's something that it's worth considering. Also, when kids are a little bit older, a lot of the kids are more technology astute, so they're more familiar with that and have that capability. So as they mature from a technology perspective, as they mature from a learning perspective, the data that's being protected is more critical. So I think as they progress, then that's the appropriate time to look at using multi-factor.
Vincent, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yes. I love Maverick's perspective of prioritizing by risk. We all need to do that from the organizational side. From the home side, yes, the kids don't have access. But for me, it's more of the getting them acclimated to the technology. And so the easy button for me is that the moment they get a phone, they have MFA. Why? Because Apple actually makes it hard for you not to, because unlocking your phone is actually easier when using Face ID or a touch versus actually keying in a password.
Password, right.
Unless you're a music star and use 6 zeros as your password. A thumbprint or Face ID would be actually faster.
I have a question. I don't deal with school systems or universities as much as I do with companies, but do the teachers that work for your school, Maverick, do they all have company or school issued devices, or are they using personal devices from home?
They all have company issued, corporate issued devices, and all the teachers are required to MFA in whenever they log into the system. So whether it's on-prem or if we have like Azure for in the cloud, all the authentication is multi-factor.
Okay. And Jody, what about for you? Are all the teachers using school-issued devices?
So we actually do not have any assurances that they're all using university-issued devices. And in fact, sometimes they choose to use their own personal devices because it might be faster, more modern than what was issued at the university. So even at this moment, as people are working remotely, we cannot guarantee that they're using school-issued devices, which provides an additional challenge for us. So our first assumption is that it's a personally owned device, and we don't have the assurances that they have the recommended institution software installed on those devices. So we have done a lot of training and awareness, especially on ensuring that they're securing their devices, as Maverick talked about, and you talked about making sure that you're using strong passwords, careful about how you use USB devices, as well as ensuring that you're systems are patched, both the operating system as well as applications. So a lot of it is coming down to, you know, training of our users and making sure that they're aware of what they need to do to secure their own personal devices. So.
Because if they're using a personal device, you also lose visibility into what other software they've put on that device.
Absolutely, and that's
Right.
one of the main problems. And you know, we don't have any way of identifying if a software was downloaded legally, illegally from a potentially malware-infected site.
Right.
Yeah,
And
it is a challenge.
That's a key point you bring up is, and it's often overlooked, is that a lot of free, quote, free software, bootleg software, actually has malware loaded in right from the beginning. So people thinking, oh, I'm going to get a bootleg copy of some software, that's really, really dangerous practice.
Correct. And so my kind of anecdote that I tell people is if it's free, be careful, because it could be as free as a sick puppy. You don't know what you're getting. It could have some long lasting impacts, right? Down the line, so.
Vincent, I have a question for you. You mentioned about having a lot of people and a lot of devices at home. Does everybody in your home have their own personal device that they use 100%, or are there shared devices?
For the most part, people have dedicated devices. The younger they are, the more likely that's going to be shared. But the older they are, there's going to be more dedicated devices. So the adults definitely have dedicated devices,
Mm-hmm.
and the tweens do. The youngest is more on the communal side.
And for those families that are using shared devices at home, either between the parents or between kids or parents and kids, what kind of advice would you give them in terms of extra precaution?
Danger, Will Robinson. Base it on risk. If you have your tax forms, don't let the kids touch that. Don't let them play games on it. Keep it isolated. Don't go Facebook, social networking on those things. If it is a communal machine, then don't do sensitive transaction on them. Don't touch or contact the work environment to do so, because you're opening yourself up, because we assume that's a less secure system, and we want to minimize doing any sensitive transactions on there. The easy button for most home users is leveraging mobile devices, tablets, phones. Those are significantly locked down more than a full-blown operating system like an Apple Mac OS or a Windows 10 device. Because the larger desktop workstations, they're more feature-rich, more powerful, and they're more sensitive, or more likely to be compromised. Whereas the mobile devices, by design, they're locked down significantly more than generic multi-purpose devices.
I would also add that if you are sharing, say, a desktop computer, that you can create separate accounts for the users, right? So maybe for your children, you want to create a more restricted account where they cannot install software applications. So basically, you want to try to create separate login accounts or separate spaces where they can kind of keep their work and their tasks separate from each other.
And then another good practice that I heard about is if, like Vincent mentioned, if people have mobile devices and all, have the family have a location within the household where they can plug in their devices at nighttime. And that achieves two things. One is a lot of the updates are done only when this thing's plugged in. So you're ensured to get the updates. The other thing it gives you is the opportunity where you know that the devices aren't used throughout the night when the kids are in bed or at home. You know, so it serves a couple of good purposes to have a dedicated section within the house and just have the family put those in at nighttime there.
That's great. And anybody listening in, if you want to send questions in, use the Q&A function. I'll keep asking questions until we get any from you. But another question that I have for the group is really thinking about it from the teacher perspective. We do know that we had some people here that had signed up that are educators, and then the educators' relationship to the IT department at their school. So when the remote situation happened, what did you do to train them? Did you have to change policies? Tell me about the relationship between the IT department and the teachers that happened during this crisis period. Maverick, we can start with you this time, and then we'll go to Jody.
Well, we utilize Teams within community schools. And so one of the things we were fortunate about was that the education setup within Teams allowed us to pull from our student management system and create team sites for each classroom. And so what we did was, it happened actually during the spring break, where we took that opportunity to go in and set that up, and also take the time to educate the teachers and all on how to utilize that and how to be effective with the technology, and how to better utilize their learning management systems to help deliver the training in the situation. So we had to adapt quite quickly, but we utilized the spring break period to actually train the educators and then show them how to use a lot of those features.
And before I go into you, Jody, how much do you rely on the teachers to educate students about cyber practices?
We actually have a part of each, at the beginning of each school year, where we go into cyber and social awareness and cyberbullying and things like that. So we try to educate the students from all different aspects of it on how to protect themselves, as well as how to learn and utilize technology. It's kind of interesting because some of the students out there are very technology savvy, but it's being aware of the malicious activity that is the focus on that, because a lot of the students are very trusting. So it's making them aware of the unsavory parts about the being on the internet.
Jody, what about at University of Hawaii?
So similar to Maverick, we actually took advantage of the spring break to push a lot of the curriculum online. So most of the faculty already had access to our online learning management system. And so they may have been at least aware that it existed. They may not have actually used it, but through that 1 week period, we definitely had to ramp up training, ensure that faculty knew how to put their content into this online management system. And then additionally, we had to go out and procure licenses to support video conferencing, and then train people up in that. And that's why our learning curve is pretty steep for any of our faculty having to deliver online courses now. So that's why there are many missteps. And I think we had a little bit of unwanted drop-ins and visitors into our video conferencing sessions. But additionally, as Maverick also said, is the students are pretty tech savvy. So it wasn't too much of an issue for the students being able to convert. But what we did notice is that the students are actually missing their in-person contact with their classmates and being in that social environment. So I think it's been taxing both on students and educators. And we're trying to figure out during summer how we're going to safely bring the students back in fall with all of the proper, social distancing and sanitization conditions that we need to set up around campus. And the other thing that I think well, Maverick, you probably have this too, is for the students in terms of dormitory settings, right? What happens if somebody gets infected and then they have to quarantine? Are we going to be able to provide quarantine spaces in the dormitory situations, or what happens in those cases too? So, we have to address it from a number of different issues, and it's been, let's say, interesting and challenging. It's a new norm though. It'll be definitely a new normal.
Yeah, that's for sure. One final question for Vincent, and then I'll turn it back over to Jill and Jen. So you mentioned about VPNs, virtual private networks as a technique. Tell us about how you're utilizing those and how you balance that versus, you mentioned also just going directly to secure cloud-based sites. So tell us a little bit about the balance of those two.
It largely depends on where that data or that application is. If we have an existing application that's on premises, then the the only real safe way today is connecting via VPN. We also have a small trial of VDI to introduce even another concept of virtual desktop environments. We're hoping that with the VDI aspect of things that we might even be comfortable enough to allow folks connecting from home systems rather than actual state-issued devices. But our current requirement right now for VPNs is to require it to only connect from a state-owned devices. That means from the hardware perspective, it's end-to-end state-owned, state-managed. Yes, and then as we move forward, there's a term right now referred to as SASE, S-A-S-E, and the concept there is that we make the assumption that all data is going to be residing in public cloud somehow. And so that way, no matter where you are in the world, if you have the right identity or authentication, you'll be able to access it in a secure manner. So that there's some strides moving in towards that direction. The best representative for the state of Hawaii has been Microsoft Office 365, where that's on the newer infrastructure side. None of that infrastructure is on premises at the state of Hawaii. It's actually all owned and managed by Microsoft. And for us to be able to access it, we simply need a solid internet connection and connect from a system that's reasonably secure, whether it be a state-owned or a home, and be able to qualify for the multi-factor authentication. So once we validate the identity piece, then folks can check their email and not require a tool such as VPN.
That's great. That's great. So we've only got a couple minutes left. I'm going to turn it back over to Jen now to wrap up.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So on behalf of Cyber Hawaii and many of our new partners representing the education sector, thank you so much for joining us. We thought, as we head into the summer, but understanding that a balance, as Jill said, between remote telelearning and in-person learning is going to be with us very likely into the fall. And so we wanted to have this discussion. This conversation is being taped as well, and we look to be able to share it with our educational partners throughout the summer. So thank you to the Cyber Resilience Institute, as always. Thank you to Maverick, and thank you to Jody and to Vince. On behalf of Cyber Hawaii, thanks.
Well, thanks very much, everybody. We really appreciate all you attending. We hope you found it to be valuable. I want to thank Vincent, Jody, and Maverick for your conversation and insight. And our friends at Cyber Hawaii, we're always available to do these. So if you want to do number 4, just let us know.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Aloha.
Bye.